Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed to respond harshly to any foreign provocation, and he says he hopes nobody crosses Moscow's red lines. Mr. Putin has just delivered his annual State of the Nation address as tensions soar with the West. Julia Chapman joins us for more on this. Julia, what are Russia's red lines?
President Vladimir Putin said those would be decided on a case-by-case basis, but he did have a very stark warning for anybody that he said was planning provocations that threaten Russia's security interests. He said they would be met with a swift and very tough response that would be asymmetrical, and that any organizers of such provocations would regret it more than anything they had ever regretted before. So very stark warnings, although he didn't specify who they were aimed at exactly. This comes at a time when there are tensions building with the United States after fresh sanctions were announced last week, as well as with Ukraine amid a military buildup on the Russian side of the border with Ukraine. But most of President Vladimir Putin's Federal Assembly address, a speech that he gives annually, was aimed at a domestic audience and focused on domestic issues. He did mention briefly sanctions, which he called illegal and politically motivated. He said other countries like to pick on Russia, but likened them to hyenas circling a tiger. But as I say, mostly domestic focused. It was promises of more government spending on infrastructure, some announcements of new benefit handouts, dedication to developing Russia's healthcare. President Putin did praise Russia for weathering the pandemic relatively well and for developing 3 vaccines against COVID-19 that he says are effective. And he gave what was probably his most impassioned call yet to the Russian people to get inoculated. So far, Russia's vaccine rollout has been a little bit slow, despite the fact that it has developed its own vaccines.
And the speech comes just hours before supporters of opposition leader Alexei Navalny gather for mass protests.
That's right. These protests have been called in response to the deteriorating health of Alexei Navalny, the opposition figure who is in prison at the moment and has been on hunger strike for 3 weeks now over what he says is inadequate medical care behind bars. He had been complaining of a numbness and lack of sensation in his extremities, as well as acute back pain. He says he hasn't received appropriate treatment for that, and his doctors, who have been blocked repeatedly from seeing him in prison, say they're very concerned about his condition and he may only have a matter of days left to live. That's why his supporters are saying this is a very urgent moment. They are calling for nationwide protests across Russia. Some of them have already happened in some of the far eastern cities of this country, and so far they've been allowed to go forward without too much interference. There's been a handful of arrests, but there's certainly a gearing up for high security presence here in Moscow. Some of the supporters and allies of Alexei Navalny have already been detained in anticipation of the protests later today.
Many thanks. Julia Chapman in Moscow.